Good morning. Today is July the 14th. It's week 2 of summer school. I know I keep on saying this, but last week we had an amazing week. Extremely, perhaps even the smoothest week we've ever had. Thanks to all of your prayers. And so we ask, would you please pray for us again? Week 2, got a big week ahead of us. So please pray for us. Please pray for our safety. And that this ministry, the summer school that our church has would be pleasing to the Lord. So it was a great week. Everyone was there. It was the place to be this past week, actually.
Actually, I thought it was the movie theaters.
What was at the movie theater? I didn't see the movie.
Yeah, everyone saw it except you.
Yeah, so apparently Superman was very good. That's what everyone says. But I think here's the thing. I think people are scared to say that it was good. But I think people say that. Like, people think it was good, but they're scared to say that it was good.
Is that what it is?
I think so. Well, Chunseok saw it. Brian saw it.
Chunseok saw it. Brian saw it. Chunseok thinks it's okay.
Brian loved it.
I'm a little scared to say it was good.
No. So Brian, he really liked it.
Brian liked it.
But I think the moment you say that you really like something now, it's like, boom, you just get attacked, I think.
Is that what it is?
But Brian is Superman.
Yeah.
In some aspects. Today we are talking about an interesting topic. Pastor Eugene, this is something that you had brought up as well. And whenever you bring up topics, it's always interesting. And we were talking about violence today. Violence. Is violence ever okay? Can you be a Christian and support violence ever? Or is peace the way to go? Or what does peace even look like? Those are the things that we'll be discussing today. Week 2 of the summer school, also Monday, July 14th. You are listening to the Dear Church Podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church Podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang. We have with us Pastor Eugene and Chunseok and Brian. And today, I wanted to start off with a passage, Pastor Eugene, and perhaps we could just kind of start from there. This is from Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, and this is the Sermon on the Mount. And this verse reads, Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Is it blessed or blessed? I never know. Because where are we? Are we in USA or are we in England?
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, what do you say blessed or blessed?
I guess it's Old English. People, when they read the Bible, they'll say blessed.
This makes it seem like, at least from the Sermon on the Mount, it makes it seem like Christianity is just simply a religion of peace. Oftentimes non-Christians will accuse Christians saying, aren't you the religion of peace? Why are you doing this? Why are you supporting that? Why are you supporting our country doing this? Jesus was never violent. How can we say that we're followers of Jesus when Jesus himself was never violent? Didn't Jesus himself support peace? And so this morning I wanted to get your thoughts on what peace is that we read of in the Bible, especially in light of Matthew 5:9, and what violence is. And is violence ever allowed? And just kind of for reference, this is from the Oxford Languages. This is the definition of violence. It's behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. So that is how we would define violence. But are Christians ever to support violence or even partake in violence? And how do we distinguish between peace, violence, or the opposite? The entire spectrum, I guess, of this topic.
Yeah, well, let's get to how, even in society today, the word violence, the definition has changed a little. Where if I say, let's say, word that I don't want people to use, describing me, I'll say that's violence. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, like if you call me something that I don't like or something.
Right, like a racial slur or something like that, then let's say, this person. So people will say, because you enacted violence against me by saying this racial slur, I get to enact violence on you. And most times it's through physical retribution. And so we don't mean what I think a lot of people mean today when we say the word violence. It means physical harm. When we talk about violence, it's causing injurious physical harm on somebody.
Yeah.
And so because of that, this is what we've always known it to be. Because now people are equating this, like even language, inflammatory language, as bad as it might be, they're equating that with violence. I think people may have some confusion about what violence is. So I want to get that clear before we move on. When we talk about violence, we're talking about an incursion of physical harm, right, against someone. And so this is something that is, for the most part, looked down upon in the Christian faith and culture. So we don't want to cause physical injury to anybody.
Yeah.
In fact, the whole goal of, Christianity is to, love God and love your neighbor. And I would say, if you're thinking about loving your neighbor, you'd probably have to really wonder if there is any time where causing physical harm to your neighbor is actually loving them. Does that make sense?
But when would that ever come about? And when do you make that discernment? Like, when do you make that decision saying, hey, this violence is okay, that violence is not okay? Where do you draw the line then?
Well, I think because we want to get into the foundational aspect of what we need to do and then go to violence, I just want to say peacemaker is a compound word in the Greek, and it's peace and maker. So you're literally making peace. And the only person that can actually make true peace, or eirene, is God. And so he wants you to be like him in making this peace. Blessed are the peacemakers, right? And so, it's one of those things that we strive to be, because they shall be called sons of God. So you see that connection there. You are like God when you make peace, because God is the one that makes peace. And so you want to be a person that makes peace. But at the same time, we saw Jesus also say, I have not come to bring peace but a sword. So he came to bring division. And he was making, he's making a metaphor there, obviously, right? He wasn't literally going around with a sword killing people. Mm-hmm. He's not Muhammad or, the religion of Islam, who, so-called proclaims itself as a religion of peace, and yet it's either the sword or the Quran, right? And that's not what Christians do. We don't say it's either the Bible or the sword. So this is not what we do. This is what we can't do that. So when we were saying what are some instances where peace and violence might, still be in line with each other, I think if you look at history, there's like a shift that happens over time, and the understanding kind of changes. And I know this might sound controversial, but I think throughout church history, the understanding changes, or it was clarified. So I'd rather use the word clarified, but it does seem like a shift over time. And so, can you read Luke 22:36?
Luke 22, verse 36 reads, he said to them, but now let the one who has a money bag take it, and likewise a knapsack, and let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. So
he's talking about if he's now going forward, he's moving on. The disciples are going to move on beyond this time. And this is what people have classically understood this to mean. As they continue to, do ministry, and time will progress, they'll mature, you're going to need a money bag. You're going to need a sword. Before, he would say, did you take a money bag? And weren't you fine when he sent out the 72, right? And now he's saying, take a money bag, take a person, take a sword. So there is a time where you're going to need a purse. You're going to have to carry money, because before they might have been confused, because before they would just go in, and if someone invited them in, they would go in and with their hospitality. If not, then they would just shake off the dust in their shoes. Do you remember that part?
Yeah.
And so now they have to take a money bag. Now they have to take a sword. So what does that mean? And so we need to look at the broader context of all these things. Does it mean that now you should, I don't know. Everyone should have a gun. Should everyone have a gun in light of Luke 22:36? Because Jesus told us, or told his disciples, to buy a sword. And yet at the same time, Jesus still says, or has said, in Matthew, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Mm-hmm. Peter obviously had a sword because he cut off the high priest servant's ear, right?
Yeah, that's a crazy thing to do.
And then what did Jesus do?
Put away.
He told Peter to put the sword away. Yep. And reattached his ear. And so he undid Peter's violence. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so one of those things that we got to keep in mind is all these things are in context. We can't just take a verse by itself. We have to look at, the whole scriptures, the whole of scripture, I should say. And when we think about stuff like this. So we have early church fathers like Chrysostom, we have Clement, we have even going all the way up to the 4th century with Augustine and what he would have to say about Luke 22:36. And so I would say in my readings, for the most part, they interpreted Luke 22:36 metaphorically. So when they're talking about the sword, carrying the sword, they're really talking about, it's not Jesus endorsing violence because, he wouldn't endorse violence. What they were talking about was maybe for spiritual warfare. That's what a lot of people, or I should say our early church fathers, interpreted as.
I always thought it was because he compares it to verse 35 when Christ is with them and he sends them out with no money bag or knapsack or sandals. But then now in 36, as he's preparing to leave them, I thought he was, like you said, kind of instructing them about what is to come, that those who hate Christ will hate them as well because they're his disciples. So like a preparation for battle, spiritual battle, I guess.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing because what are you going to do? Are Christians supposed to be complete pacifists? So when someone comes to try to steal your money purse or your belongings, you're just going to get beaten and taken all the time? Because one of the other times that Jesus did speak was he said, if someone asks you for your cloak, give him your tunic too. If he asks you to go with you a mile, go the extra mile.
Yeah.
And so he says that. And so it seems like really pacifistic teaching to me. That's what people might say, right? And yet at the same time, he gives us what he says in Luke 22:36. And again, I'm saying all this to kind of lay out the groundwork because I do not think that they are, they contradict each other. I'm saying there are tension with each other because we need to understand what's really at stake here. What is the really foundational goal of all these things?
Is that where the term "go the extra mile" came from?
Maybe.
So, and I wanted to also bring up what you just brought up. This is Matthew 5:38-42. I'll read that for us. And it reads, "You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you. Do not refuse the one who would borrow from you." And so, like you said, there is a tension here because here it seems almost pacifist in the sense of you kind of let everyone walk over you in a sense, right? Because if someone would sue you and take your tunic, you give him your cloak as well. Okay. Do not resist the one who is evil. If someone slaps you, turn to him the other cheek. It feels pacifist, but it is interesting because he's comparing it to Hammurabi's code in verse 38. Well, actually, it's not Hammurabi's code because Hammurabi got it from the Pentateuch. But how do we think through that? Because it's almost ingrained in us as Christians that violence is bad.
Yeah.
It's just bad. Like, oh, you shouldn't do that because why? Oh, because you're a Christian. Oh, you shouldn't do that. Why? Because you're a Christian. So it's almost ingrained within us. And so for us to even think that Christians can ever support violence, it may be a foreign concept.
Well, I think violence. If you're saying violence being bad is ingrained within us, I'm not sure if that's necessarily a bad thing. Again, let me go back to the church fathers before I move on forward. So even Tertullian, I'm going to quote from Tertullian's work. He said, "Only without the sword can the Christian wage war. The Lord has abolished the sword." So he took a more pacifistic stance, or a pacifist stance. And so when we read early works like this, we see that during the Roman occupation, during the Roman Empire, all these Christians and Christian fathers, they would start writing, and they did not write that you should enact violence, get revenge, hold rebellion. You shouldn't do any of that stuff, right? So Christians don't rebel against the worldly powers, because what Christians need to promote, enact, live out is this spiritual kingdom. And to do that, it must be separated from the worldly kingdom. And this is where we see the two cities, right? From Augustine. Augustine articulated it, but this is what early church fathers all believed. They believed that this was a difference between the spiritual kingdom of God and the physical world. Again, Augustine's writings will develop. And again, I would like to say the word clarified, because as time goes on, the church fathers will start to clarify what it means to be, for instance, two kingdoms. That's from Martin Luther, right? And so he articulated it that way. And then we have the spheres of influence by Abraham Kuyper. And so that develops over time. But I want to say in the beginning, you'll see that in the context that Christians have lived in, because the Roman Empire was, the reigning empire of the world, Christians, they didn't act in violence. Look, all over the Roman Empire, outside the Roman Empire, inside the Roman Empire, violence abounded, I should say. And, this is how people wanted to overthrow the Roman Empire. And in fact, if you look back now, the Roman Empire really just died from within. But what survived, what continued to thrive and grow, it actually wasn't any other. Like the Germanic tribes didn't survive and thrive, even though they invaded Rome. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, what survived and thrived and grew? It was Christianity. So in the end, with this kind of mentality, these teachings, Christianity continued to grow even past the Roman Empire. I get it. Like, I think I wanted to stop at the Edict of Milan, and then kind of talk about how a shift would come. But I could wait for a question that you might have.
So it almost makes it seem like you're saying peace is better than violence. But then does that mean that we should never defend ourselves?
So, okay, I'm going to continue on that. Maybe I can answer your question with some history too. So for the first time in history, there is a pronounced Christian nation. Whether they're really Christian or not, that can be debated.
Yeah.
But there, the people there said, Constantine said, this is a Christian nation now, right?
Yep.
For the first time in history, we see this happen. And for the first time in history, Christians are in power. This had never happened before. They're a world power now. This never happened before. The closest thing that could have ever happened to it was maybe during King David and King Solomon. But even then, that was a tiny, tiny piece of land.
Yep.
A little bit bigger than New Jersey, maybe New York State, something like that. That's nothing. We're talking about the Roman Empire here, right?
Yeah.
And so for the first time in history, we see this happen. So now that Christians are in power, and they're not just in power over themselves, they're in power over other people. It's a pluralistic empire. There are other religions there, and you can say we don't want these other religions, but if you really want to, let's say, rule over people, then you're going to have to decide up to what we can allow. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So do we allow for this kind of practice or that kind of practice? All these things needed to be developed, right? They needed to be thought out. And during Augustine's time, we saw the just war theory start to come out a lot in people's thinking. Just war theory isn't that necessary if you're not in power. Does that make sense? And so Christians don't enact personal vengeance. We look to the government. We ask the government for justice, but we understand that ultimately justice will come from God. And that's how Christians will always understand it, has understood it. But now what if the government that's supposed to enact justice is self-proclaiming to be a Christian government? Then couldn't you hold the government then to a different standard than, let's say, a secular government, right? I could hold, and going to today, I could hold the government of the United States of America differently, to a different standard than the CCP. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I could hate the CCP. I could hate that government for what they're doing, but I would hold it to a different standard than, let's say, a government that says we are a Christian nation. And that's basically what started to develop. And so now what we're seeing is, when is it, because from Romans 13 we know that the sword has the government has a sword. So if we're supposed to be pacifists, but then Christians are in charge of government, is the sword gone from the government? So that's where the just war theory had to start, really develop. But again, this is more about, nations, and then from nations we went to families, then we went to the individual. That's how I see it.
So just to define what just war theory is, just for our listeners that may not be familiar, this is from the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs. Just war is warfare that is justified by moral or legal tradition. Just war theory presumes that there are legitimate uses of war, but also sets moral boundaries on the waging of war. It deals with two fundamental questions concerning the ethics of war and peace. When is it morally and legally justified to go to war? What moral principles should we follow during war? Just ad bellum, moral justifications for going to war, requires that the cause for war is just. The right authority makes the decision. The decision is made with the right intention of bringing about peace. The war is a last resort. The overall evil of the war does not outweigh the good. Just in bello, moral principles to follow during war, governs the treatment of prisoners, requires the protection of civilians, and prohibits the disproportionate use of force. A third part of just war theory is just post bellum, denoting justice after war. The historical aspect of just war, also referred to as the just war tradition, represents the historical rules such as the Geneva Convention that have been applied to wars. Ethical theorists of international relations must consider the philosophical coherence of international agreements and reflect upon the circumstances that legitimize the waging of war. Just so that our listeners are aware.
One of the key takeaways from that is you need to assess the morality of the war, and you need to assess the proportionality of the war. So you cannot respond with excess. So if you slap me in the face, I can't stab you in the stomach.
Right.
That is not just war.
Yeah.
Right. So it really does go back to biblical principles like an eye for an eye, that kind of thing.
So I guess my question is, as Christians, when we see this kind of stuff, so not all of us have really much say in, let's just say, the U.S. going to war, because that's, the higher ups decide that. When we support or do not support countries waging war on one another, recently there have been some conversations, especially with Israel and Iran, and when someone reacts a certain way to aggression, they'll say, "Oh no, but they're just defending themselves for the future." And I've heard that multiple times, right? So even for and we've debunked this before, but even for the Israel-Iran conflict, when Israel went and destroyed all their nuclear programs, they're like, that seems like quite an overreaction, because they didn't do anything. They're just talking. It's an overreaction. And then that side will say, why doesn't Iran have the right to defend themselves? But we already talked about that already, obviously. But when we see this happening in world history, where it seems like one is doing something to defend their country, but it goes beyond what was done to them, how do we think through this kind of stuff?
Yeah, now we have a lot of foreign affairs that we have to deal with. It gets really complicated. Again, This is one of those topics that, I don't know, I'm not that confident about, and I don't think I know much or enough about it. But at the same time, like this whole business of allies has changed a lot.
Yeah.
So the fact that you have allies, meaning like now if let's say you're the UK and I'm the US,
Hello?
if someone attacks the UK,
Good
it's
day.
like attacking me.
Yes.
That's what allies is.
NATO.
But because of that, but is that true?
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm a sovereign state. You're a sovereign state. If someone attacks you, that's not like attacking me.
Right.
But with the ally partnerships, things started to change, and then within the allies, there's this back and forth. They're spying on each other. Look, all the ally states spy on each other. That's a fact, right? And so, when you're thinking about allies, it's not like we're not saying we're best friends. It means that there is this partnership, and that we'll move together, and things of that nature. And so, because of that, it gets really complex. You can hate the whole ally thing, but that was my point in the beginning. You could hate it. You can love it. It matters not. If you're an ally, you've made a commitment. And so we made a commitment to Israel that because we're an ally. Look, if you don't want to be allies with Israel, good for you. But the country is. The country has decided a long time ago that the values and the goals of this country align with ours, and that we can partner with them to a degree where we'll call them allies, right? And so we don't want the destruction of this nation. It'll be very bad for even our, security and things of that nature. So whatever you decide, whether you like them or not, they're our allies, right?
Yeah.
And so whether that's perpetual, no, I can't guarantee anything, right? I don't know if they're going to be allies forever. We don't know that, right? And so this kind of convolutes a lot of stuff. It makes things a little bit more complicated. But going back to now, I'm going to move on forward from Augustine. We're going to go past Aquinas, actually, for time's sake. But let's go to the Reformed Fathers. And they believe, well, I already mentioned Luther believed in two kingdoms. There's something called two swords, right? That Calvin talks about. And it's understanding that there's a sword for each group, and none of the reformers or the early church fathers wanted militarism. They did not want that. So some of the early church fathers were pacifists, like Tertullian, like I told you, right? He was leaning on the more pacifist side, but none of the reformers were pacifists. None of them. They did believe in two swords. They believed in two kingdoms. They believed that, like Calvin, especially because Geneva was ruled by the church, right? And the church, like the church and state, they were mixed in Geneva, where Calvin was in. You know that, right?
No.
So yeah, like the state decided how many times you could have communion and stuff.
Oh.
Yeah, because the church and state were kind of like in the same plane. And so when you go into places like that, again, this is because Christians are never in power. Then you could think like, oh, maybe Luke 22:36 was a metaphor. But as you continue to go on, people less and less people started to think like that. But at the same time, they did not think none of them ever thought violence was good. Violence was ever something that you wanted to, do. Like, oh, yay, we could enact violence on somebody. That's not what they thought.
Yeah.
And so it's not militarism, but it's not pacifism. And there was a right way to do it. And so, obviously, Calvin especially would support the use of force by the magistrate because, God is the one that gives, these magistrates in his sovereignty, their sovereignty, so their authority. Does that make sense?
But what if someone were to respond by saying, well, how does that make us different from any other person in the world? How does that make us different from someone that hasn't experienced the love of God? Because as Christians who have experienced the love of God, we're supposed to be sharing that love to other people. If what you just said sounds just like a normal person, meaning like you don't go overboard and yet you don't get stepped on, you choose
that is strictly a Western value. No other value system in the world thinks like that. They always go overboard and they always rationalize it's because you deserved it. Look at Islam. You could compare anything, any other conquering, society in the world, how they conquered, how they continue to expand power. It's not tit for tat. It's not. It was always above and beyond so that they can extend ground, so that they can continue to, enforce their values upon someone else. And that's why now people are trying to flip the Western ideals back against the Western man, trying to use their argument. But what they really want, this is Marxism I'm talking about, what they really want is the overturning of Western values so they could go back to the old archaic, barbaric ways, which is Marxism, by the way. And so, no. When we're talking, proportionality, we're talking Western value. Western values is proportionality. When we go beyond it and people are upset, that's because they hold on to Western values. Otherwise, we see what we saw with the Capulets and the Montagues, or any other classic, family rivalry going back and forth. It just continues to escalate. And so Christians are not for aggression, but they are not for pacifism. And so when people attack us and, let's say a Christian nation with its own sovereignty, can we defend ourselves? Those were the questions that they had to ask. And the answer was unanimously yes by the reformers, especially. They were yes. If someone attacks us and we're because we're Christian and we are Christian, do we have the right to defend ourselves? And the answer is yes. So Augustine too would see Luke 22:36 more like a prophecy then.
I see.
Right? And so there's going to be a time where you're going to need the sword. And in fact, that was true, right? It's true. There is a time now, especially, where we do need the sword. The United States needs the sword to defend its own borders from enemy attacks, its citizens from enemy capture and things like that.
So I guess as you're speaking, I'm continuing to think about maybe different questions that someone may have. But when we look at church history, not just simply world history, but church history, the men that we celebrate are men that even to the death preached, and even to the death were faithful to the cause of Christ. During our church history episode, we even talked about Jan Hus, right, who was burned at the stake for being a heretic. Couldn't it be said, why didn't he fight back? Like, I get it was the government, but if someone was trying to grab you, someone's trying to take you, and if he killed somebody, if he attacked back and ran away, we wouldn't celebrate him. But it was because he was almost docile. It was because he was almost just able to take death and look it in the face for the sake of Christ. That's why we celebrate him. So aren't we celebrating the peaceful guys rather than quote unquote violent men?
That's true. I mean, after a while, the reformers went even as far as to say, and I should find out the exact reformer that really solidified this, but this is off the top of my head and memory too, but we would have the right to fight against tyranny. So Romans 13 is more about the sword promoting godly order. So if someone doesn't promote godly order, then we would have the right to stand against tyranny, which is what our founding fathers did.
Right.
They believed that.
Right.
And so those are things where we continue to see where, all right, we should have nonviolent, but it's not non-resistance. Nonviolence as much as we can, but it's not non-resistance. So, and then your question about John Huss is, well, couldn't he have fought his way? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know, to be honest. because what was that? It was like 1400 or something. That when that happened, but maybe not. Because if you're captured, you're captured. You know.
Yeah, and maybe he just didn't have the ability to. But
And secondly, it was a church that did it to him. It was a church that did it to him. It wasn't just some random guys. It was a church that burned him at the stake.
so I guess and the reason why I ask this is because it seems like throughout church history, the men who chose peace are the men that are celebrated. So,
I think always you want to do what's godly and what's right. I mean, look, I get it that I introduced a lot of elements here, but the people that we celebrate weren't perfect.
right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like you saw that what do you call that? Broadway show Hamilton.
Yes. Oh,
It's pretty popular.
Great show.
Alexander Hamilton just always dueled with people.
Yeah, which is a crazy
Very
concept.
violent man, that guy, Very
They just
violent
shot
man.
each other like as
they
sport.
duel to the death. That dude did it like a record number of times. I forget exactly how many, but
Crazy.
he was very violent. He was a violent man.
Yeah.
We're recording on the 12th, right? But yesterday, on July 11th, or 3 days ago from when you're listening, July 11th in 1804, this is how also the Broadway show ends too. But Aaron Burr
Yes.
and Alexander Hamilton had to do, and this is where Alexander Hamilton will die.
Yes.
His bullet was lodged in some kind of tree branch, and Aaron Burr shot him right in the abdomen, which was a fatal hit. And so, guy died. That's the point. But right after he died, a Presbyterian minister came out and said, his name is Eliphalet. Yeah, Eliphalet.
Oh no.
Knott is a Presbyterian minister and president of Union College, gave a sermon at North Dutch Church in Albany, New York, and it was called On the Death of Hamilton. Now, I'm going to put a side note. All good Presbyterian ministers are political, and we're always political. I don't know where we got this whole thing where people shouldn't be political at all. But the day after, actually not the day after, like a few weeks after, on July 29, 1804, so it was like 2.5 weeks after, he gave a sermon called On the Death of Hamilton. And that sermon was to say we cannot resolve things with violence so easily, so flippantly. And people say because that oratory, that sermon was so powerful that it significantly decreased the practice of dueling in America. I get it that Hamilton's death shocked everybody, shocked the whole world. He was a founding father. He had significant weight, and people in the world knew who he was.
Yeah.
But his death sent shockwaves, and people didn't know what to do with it. And then the oratory or the sermon that Eliphalet Knott gave clarified what we should do with that shock. We should stop dueling. Something kind of obvious to us, but you see how that culture changed because of that clarity. But back then, people were like, let's just duel it out because this is just war. You talk bad about my reputation. My reputation is tanking. That's my life. My life is reputation. I get to take your life for that, so I can hold to my reputation. So they resorted to violent resolution when they dueled. That was taken away. And so, look, I'm not saying like, we know it perfectly now or they knew it perfectly back then. I think people are continually learning, and that's what the Reformed faith is all about. You continue to go back to the Bible, and then you clarify things that you thought was in the Bible, but it's not. And you say, actually, violent behavior should not be condoned. When is it acceptable? And then you have just war. And then you have to discuss morality. You have to discuss proportionality. And so that's where I think, that's a wise and decent place to end up in.
So I think one of the questions that people may have regarding this topic is maybe, I mean, there are personal level discernment questions that people may have, right? How should I respond in this situation? Can I own a gun as a Christian? Wesley Huff owns many swords, by the way. Like, can I own this? Can I own that? Can I own nunchucks? Nunchucks.
I have no idea.
Is it because they make you numb? Nuns, and then so you have that, and that's that's a personal level. But also, like you were saying, on a huge government level, I think there is this idea that if you're an American and you support America, you have to support everything that America's ever done, which I don't think is true. But people will say, well, do Christians support the bombing of in World War II when we bombed Japan? Was that obsessed? Like, was that over the line there? Is that a violence? Do we support that? And then, even with everything that's happening with Israel right now, like, why are we supporting violence? Why are we trying to get into a war? All this other stuff. And I think people are confused. Like, where do we stand on things that our government does? Like, how do we kind of think through that and converse about this?
Yeah, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is still a pretty controversial one, especially in light of Tulsi Gabbard and Tucker Carlson making the comments that they did in the past few months. And so was it a proportionate response to drop, the atomic bomb on those two cities with civilians, with women and children?
Right.
Where if you still go, you could still see shadows of people. That's, from the incineration. Was that a proportionate response? And I think those are discussions that people still have today. And obviously, the government, the U.S. government, had made that decision to drop the two bombs to stop the World War, thinking that it would save more lives in the long run. That's not an easy decision. And, I guess we'll know in heaven for sure, but time will continuously tell us, what the impacts of that is. And so obviously there's a lot of jokes out there and things like that from it. And I don't know if they're necessarily funny or good, but I saw this recent one where there's this TikTok influencer who go back in time to stop the atomic bomb droppings. And then he comes back. He's like, how did it go? And he's like, I went well. It's like, all right, let's watch the new episode of this anime. And then the guy's like, what's anime? And he goes, oh no, what have I done? And then he wants to go back. And so there's some really bad jokes like that. But there's one of those things where people can maybe reflect on. This is part of Japan's history. They've developed and they've matured from all the things that have happened. I think the U.S. has hopefully learned from that too. I think because of that, there was even through the arms race, there was, maybe a little bit more, I don't know, the world leaders probably, more restraint in dropping the A-bombs because, what happened in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, it was well recorded so that you could actually see the devastation that it caused. And so actually seeing it and just saying, let's just drop it and, just that's what they get, that kind of thing. It's really hard to argue for proportionality when you see the devastation that it causes. And so even nuclear fallouts, we have Chernobyl, we have what happened in, is it Ishinomaki? The Fukushima nuclear plant.
Yes.
That, went bad. Meltdown, all that stuff, and so we know what happens. It's incredibly dangerous. So hopefully, by God's grace, the leaders of the world will be restrained in using such devastating weapons. But those are things that we talk about when we go through all this. But I gotta say that where we are now, where we say. I think Junseok mentioned Samuel Rutherford. Samuel Rutherford wrote Lex Rex, and it's basically, the premise is God's law is above every king. And if you defy God's law, we don't have to listen to you. Which is really what Justin Martyr did too. Justin Martyr, again, early church father, would try to plead with the Roman Empire, Roman government. Like, look at these Christians. They're actually good because they're trying to do everything you tell them to do. They're really good citizens. Stop martyring them, because people, Christians are getting martyred because of their faith, because they weren't an approved religion. And so those are things that we'll see going forward. And this is how we got the United States developed. We'll see that we hate tyranny. We won't stand for it. We'll stand up against tyranny because we believe that's against God's law. So let's say the United States becomes more tyrannical over time. I don't think Christians in this country will stand for it. We won't be like, well, that's how the government goes. We don't have any power. We shouldn't resist, right? Absolutely not. I do think Christians will stand up against that. And they would even go as far as to take up sword to defend their homes and their families and their churches from government overreach, tyrannical overreach.
I don't want to extend the conversation, but I just have a question on that. Do you think that's a Christian thing, though, or an American thing? Or is there even a difference?
No, I think it stems from Christianity. So, again, the Founding Fathers, 55 out of 56 of the Founding Fathers, right, the leaders of their states who signed the Declaration of Independence, they were Protestant, they were Presbyterian, most of them Presbyterian. Anabaptists are a different story. We won't get into it.
The new boys.
Anabaptists are still pacifist. And so, as Presbyterians, we're not Anabaptists. We're not pacifist. And so that's a different story. I do believe that it is a Christian principle that we hold on to, where we'll say, stand your ground, defend your family, defend your home from incoming threats is a Christian principle. Yeah. But we draw that line much differently than, let's say, another worldview. Very differently from another worldview. Things like now even, you see Muslims chanting like they want to retake Spain because Spain was theirs once.
Yeah, that's tough.
And so you'll see that in Spain. Muslims are saying Spain was our land a long time ago, so we should take it back. They actually occupied most of what is Spain now before the First Crusades.
So I guess all to wrap this up, there's a lot to wrap up, actually. It's like when you have a lot of things that you have to wrap up. Yeah,
I mean, I think people really want to know when it's okay to enact personal violence, like in a personal way.
That's the tough one, yeah.
So if you were commanded by the state to, enact violence, then, C.S. Lewis also reiterated this, you are not sinning to do that because the government has the power of the sword. So if the government's doing that, then you need to be a soldier in war. So soldiers in war should not feel any guilt for shooting and killing people because you're defending your country. We are now currently at an all-time low of immorality. So people don't want to be a soldier. People don't trust the government. So they're just sending our boys into war so they could die for their own gain. So this is a very, very low kind of trust now. Yeah. So I get that, but classically speaking, you're not sinning if you enact violence as a soldier because you're commanded to do certain things. Now, people, I think, want to go to the personal level. Well, if someone pushes you, can you push them back, right? If someone punches you, can you punch them back? And I would still go with what Jesus said. Jesus said, if someone slaps you on the right cheek, give them your left, right? Right?
But it feels kind of cheeky if you do that. Like, oh, here's my left one. You know what I mean?
Is that like a pun upon a pun?
It was deep for me. Yeah.
Okay.
What?
Chunsa said that was the worst. And so, again, we got to go back to the goal. The goal is if someone's persecuting you for being a Christian, then you don't enact violence against that person saying, now you have to be a Christian or the sword, right? We don't do the sword or the Bible. Yeah. That's what Muslims do.
Yeah.
And so what do? We show them by our good life, our good, the way we live it, our love for our neighbor. Again, Acts 6 is a really great example of how, Christians love their neighbor, the least of these, and the priests would even, convert, looking at what the first disciples and deacons did. I would go with that. So personally speaking, you have to understand that you will be persecuted for your faith to a good degree. It could be people, it could be groups of people. And now you're going to have to make this really hard decision. Up to where can I defend myself? And for me, just to say simply, reductively saying you should be a complete pacifist or you should be a militarist, I think is too reductionist. So there are times when you have to use wisdom. Should you defend your family from violence? I think absolutely you should. If someone's going after your daughter, you should defend them.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's a basic tenet of the Christian faith. And so that's when you might even have to use violence to, defend them. But if someone comes up to you and slaps you and be like, all right, why did you do that? And you could get upset at that and you can explain to them that you shouldn't do that. You can turn them over to the authorities because the authorities have the sword. You could do all that. But then if you slap them back, then I would say now you're going above and beyond what Christ has taught you to do. And I would say because you have to keep in mind the goal, the ultimate telos of all of this. And that is to make disciples. And that's what you're thinking about, especially when you are dealing with a non-Christian person. You're trying to say, how can I live a life of witness? What can I say? What can I do? That should be on your mind. And, those are things that I think if you didn't defend your family, you'd be a bad witness. If you just said, rape my wife and daughters and take my son captive because I'm a Christian, I don't think you'd be a good witness. I think you should defend them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You know what's crazy though? That Lot does that. It's a crazy thing. I never understood that.
That's another complicated one. That's a little bit more complicated.
I never understood that one.
Yeah. It reminds me of, and something that I really wanted us to pray this Saturday, because that's when we're recording, was, our brother Wayne did pray for the flood victims in Texas. Yep. We should have added that as our thing, but maybe we'll add it this coming week. There was a Wall Street Journal article on it where when the warnings happened, a father who had sent his 2 daughters to the camp immediately picked up his kayak and started kayaking to try to save his daughters. And that's truly heartbreaking. And that, I think that's the heart of a father. And I think that really stems from a godly virtue. A Christian father and a non-Christian father should both have it, but especially the Christian father should have it.
Yeah.
And immediately when the flood water started to rise, because it rose like over 20 feet in like 45 minutes, something ridiculous like that, right? Immediately he took his kayak and he started to, he tried to save his daughters. And that really is heartbreaking. And so many people have died because of that. And we should keep, the flood victims in our prayers. Last I looked, it was 160 plus people perished. A lot of people still missing. Yeah. And I think those numbers might go up by the time this recording is released, but the Christian virtue is especially there. We want to protect, we want to save, we want to be a good witness, and all of that needs to be there. So when you're thinking about violence, are you protecting somebody? Are you saving somebody? Are you doing something for self-interest, for self-gain, or are you doing it for the other? Yeah, and I hope that's something that you could keep in mind when you are maybe a little bit confused about violence. If someone slaps you in the face, that's something that I do believe that Jesus taught us well on how to respond. And turning the other cheek is not an easy thing, but it is thinking about, what can I do to be a witness that will shock this other person, saying what I believe is drastically different from what you believe, but what I believe leads to life, and the way you're living your life only leads to damnation. So it is a witness thing that I hope people can keep in mind.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's really helpful. And kind of as you were speaking, I was just kind of thinking it's interesting that even as Christians, we oftentimes just completely don't do this well. We either, if someone slaps us, we just respond completely in force, or we say, oh, I'm not going to defend, this and that because I'm a Christian. Like I just feel like we've come to a place where we don't have a correct understanding of peace. We don't have a correct understanding of violence, and I think that comes from the fact that we don't have a correct understanding of the Bible. And so I think that's really helpful for us today as we think through these things, and not only personally, but also as we hear the news and as we have conversations with our families, our friends, coworkers. It's important for us to understand how a Christian views the world, especially in light of peace and violence as well. I was thinking that we go to a Q&A. We have an interesting Q&A today.
We need a beat.
What you got in the bag? What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag?
So, Q&A time. The question is, should we sing imprecatory psalms? Just as a definition, the imprecatory psalms are psalms that are pronouncing or asking for judgment upon evil doers. Since this is part of the psalms, part of scripture, and we know the psalms are prayers or songs that are written by the psalmist, whether it's David or Asaph, as Brian says. If we do not sing the psalms, are we missing a dimension of our worship? And so the person that asked this question referenced Psalm 137, verse 9, and this is how it reads. It reads, "Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock." That's a tough verse to sing. But if it's in the Bible, though, and it's a psalm, let me read the entire chapter for you. The title is, "How Shall We Sing the Lord's Song?" This is Psalm 137. "By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our lyres, for there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, 'Sing us one of the songs of Zion.' How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem, how they say, lay it bare, down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall he be who repays you with what you have done to us. Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock." And so obviously, the psalmist is talking about Babylon, and blessed shall he be who dashes your little ones being the little ones of Babylon, and dashes them against the rock.
Yeah.
I get it. It's the enemies of God, and it's the enemies of God's children.
Yeah.
So it's justice. But how do we,
I guess this kind of goes in line with what we were talking about earlier with the
violence
and the pacifists.
Yes.
Right? But Christians aren't pacifists, so there's that. We shouldn't be, at least. I get it that some Christians are, but we shouldn't be. We need to sing every single psalm. That's basically what it comes down to. There's always been this back and forth, even through our history. Should we take these psalms out, or can we sing this psalm when it calls upon vengeance, right? No, we sing every psalm, and we should pray the psalms, every single one of them. And it teaches us something, that imprecatory psalms aren't supposed to be prayed against your personal enemies. That's not how it's done.
Yeah.
Imprecatory psalms. So people don't want to pray imprecatory psalms because they're like, oh, I'm going to pray this against my neighbor who I hate, this guy, this heathen, this pagan. That's not how you're supposed to pray the imprecatory psalm. Imprecatory psalms are psalms that put us in a state of fear and trembling. This is what the Puritans realized too. It puts us in a state of fear and trembling because of God's justice. And at the same time, we want God's justice, because without God's justice, there's no order, there's only decay, there's degradation, there's deprecation, there's decadence, right? And so we should sing the imprecatory psalms. And people always use the caveat carefully. Obviously, you're not supposed to. That sounded a little bit like Christopher Walken. Obviously.
You have like a Christopher Walken thing, yeah.
No, I don't. But
it's very nice.
Obviously, it's not with personal vendetta in mind. So when you do something wrong to me, let's say you stab me in the back, I'm not going to start praying imprecatory psalms against you.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
not
it's
how
not
it's
like that.
meant to be.
Yeah.
We're talking about God's enemies, and enacting God's justice. And so when you're talking about, praying, oh, this specific line is against the wicked. Oh yeah. But you also recognize, man, I'm the wicked too. I need salvation. I need grace. That's something that would arise within the tension that you have as you pray these imprecatory psalms or sing the imprecatory psalms. So should we pray it? Should we sing it? And the answer is absolutely yes, but you should not do it with a personal vendetta or for personal vengeance. Let's say someone, really does wrong to you. Your boss doesn't treat you right, or your employee is a terrible employee. Do you start praying imprecatory psalms against the person? And they, obviously not, right? But when you pray these imprecatory psalms, you are saying that it's what you're really yearning for is God's justice. You're meditating on God's judgment, and what you come in awe is with God's rule.
Yeah.
So that's what you really want to focus on.
That's helpful. And as Chunsuk found, Chunsuk always, Chunsuk and Brian, I should say, because it's true, they always think in a very different way than I think. And it's very helpful. And they add a lot of gems. I don't know why I just said that. I don't know where that came from.
Chunzak is a gem.
That was
When I
weird.
think of Chunzak, I think gem too.
Do you think that?
Yeah. And when I think of Brian, I think of a gem like onyx.
Like that's a black gem though.
Because it's very dark.
It's like a dark. If you've ever seen Yu-Gi-Oh, he's like dark magician, and then Chunsuk's like blue eyes white dragon.
He's like an emerald. What's that funny?
What? Dark magician is purple. He's my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh character. Oh, he's my favorite character. So Chunsuk just found. Not saying Brian doesn't find. He finds all types of things. They both find collectively a lot of gems. But Chunsuk just found that the Trinity Psalter that the OPC uses, verse 6 reads, "O Babel's daughter, doomed to die, blessed be the one repaying you. Blessed he who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock." So people do sing this in like today.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like there are people that have actually. So if you're a follower of, let's say, C.S. Lewis and Tim Keller, then they would style, they would shy away from that stuff. That's from a song. So she listens to this song where the robber goes in and he goes knock knock knock, and he actually does the song. And so my daughter is knocking on the door screaming knock knock knock. But yeah, and so yeah, like C.S. Lewis, Tim Keller, they would say this is non-normative for the Christian, but I would kindly disagree with these two great men and go back to the Puritans, where I would say you have to pray the imprecatory psalms because it shows you God's character, and it shows you that He is someone that you ought to, in front of, have fear and trembling. His justice is beyond what we could ever comprehend and what we can actually even hold, right? And but at the same time, it's something that we long for.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Follow up. This is talking about the Psalms. So I've tried praying the Psalms. The part that it gets difficult though is when David is talking about his personal enemies, and you talked about how we're not singing these imprecatory psalms because someone pushed me down the stairs. Although I don't know why I said that. That's really violent.
Push me down a cliff? Oh yeah.
No,
because that's probably what you're thinking subconsciously. If someone pushed you
it
down
was
a cliff,
hill. I feel like
if someone pushed you down a cliff, you might pray an imprecatory psalm against it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
No. Yeah. I think so. But how do we pray through those parts where David is praying about Saul, where David is praying about the Philistines? How do we pray through those things? Because we might not have enemies like that.
Oh, yeah. Again, it goes back to, and this is where I think some of the confusion might lie, but I would say it goes back to the enemies of David were more, broadly speaking, they were enemies of God.
Right.
They wanted to kill David, not because of David. They wanted to kill David because of their hatred against Yahweh.
Okay.
And so what you are seeing is a hatred against God. And this is what God also says, And Jesus says this too. They'll persecute you because they persecute me. They hate you because they hate me. Still to this day, people hate the Jews, and people have to, like Christians. You have to take a step back. Why do people still hate the Jews so much? They're not, they're not the Israel or the church that the Bible's talking about, or are they? To what degree? Where does Romans fit into this? How Paul will give up his own salvation for the salvation of the Jews. And by that, he meant the non-saved ethnically Jews. He's talking about the ethnic Jews, right? He's not talking about, spiritual Jews. He's not talking about that, right? And so those are things that Christians probably have to think about. It's a very, very short answer to a more complex question.
That's helpful, though.
Sorry
That's
about
helpful.
that. Yeah,
No, that's
but
helpful.
I would say, in the end, I get it that people can disagree on to what level we should sing these imprecatory songs, but hopefully, this is a basic way of understanding why we should pray and sing the imprecatory psalms and how we should understand it.
Thank you, Pastor Eugene. And we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week. We are flying by through the summer. Again, if you have any questions, I don't know why I said that just now. I'm saying a lot of things just for the sake of saying them. I'm trying new things, yeah.
Yeah, doing double duty with summer school. That's what it is.
No. Brian and Junseok are just like if I had a pearl
They're
necklace.
gems.
If
You're a pearl, they're gems. I get it.
Wait.
I get it. You just said you're a
What's the
pearl.
difference?
You don't know the difference between a pearl and a gem?
No.
A
Wait.
gem is a rock,
Yeah.
and a pearl is what you find in an oyster.
No, I know what it is, but is there a
Or
difference?
clam. It's clam, right?
Yeah. Is there a difference in value?
Oyster.
Is
Yeah.
there a difference in value?
Difference in value, of course.
Pearl is less or more important?
Yeah, it depends.
Yeah, like gem, like amethyst or whatever it's called.
That's a lot of Minecraft.
We thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we are flying through the summer. Make the summer count by praying for our summer school. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. I'm kind of trying to get prayers just from everybody because we really need it. It's going super smoothly because of your prayers, so thank you.
Yeah.
We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith.
Peace.